also. Yeah. So we're here to discuss in-store pickup and how we're going to implement. There are guys from the ISM agency who currently involved into that activity. A couple, like a half, literally half of the team, because there is a team of 6, now it's a team of 3. And the guys faced with several like open questions, issues, which need to be like discussed with product owner. Also, we have a request for additional functionality from Pablo and from Bettina. And this is also a kind of functionality which could be implemented in the scope of the in-store pickup, because especially it would be useful for in-store pickup because this is kind of product procurement functionality when we will be making the source transition to fulfill order for the in-store pickup. So that we got a feature request from Bettina and Pablo, so that we can discuss how we can implement it, because there were also several open questions to product owner and like to the idea by itself. Because we in a Magento we are not tending to implement the real product procurement functionality in the scope of the Magento Community Edition, because we have a dedicated product for that, so that would be implemented in the scope of the Magento Order Management. So here we discuss all of that stuff to clarify the questions which are currently unclear, and to proceed with further implementation of the in-store pickup. So probably from my end, I'm just stop talking, and guys from ISM agency, so Sasha can describe some of the open questions, and then we can proceed with the idea proposed by Pablo and Bettina.
Yeah, hello guys. I think the first and the most important question which we would like to ask, it's related about naming. So if we are going to talk about inventory, that we agreed that that place where goods are kept is named as source. Just a source, yeah. But if we are going to talk about context in-store pickup functionality, which name will be the best to describe the place when the customer can came and just grab his order? So we're thinking about naming as a pickup point, but actually this is a thing which we want to agree with you. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. This is probably something that I should discuss with Lori. I see you're on the call as well. We want to make sure, of course, that this is a translatable phrase. So if the merchant wants to use an alternative term on the front end, that they would have the option to do so. With that said, I think pickup point could work. Is there a reason that you don't want to use store location because you believe that some of this might be used for something like a locker or other location that's not actually a store?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand the reason why we wouldn't use a store terminology. Is it because you have some use cases where the point of pickup would not actually be a store, but it would be some other type of location?
I believe guys probably thinking about like Amazon Locker or something like that.
Okay. Why don't we? I don't know, Laura, if you had any thoughts on this, or whether pickup point seems to be a generic yet specific enough term.
How about pickup location? That way they know it's a location and not just a point. Could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, just to clarify, yeah. Because probably like we can use another terminology on a front end. So the main Currently, this question related first of all to the how we will call this entity in the source code. Because for the front end we can use, for example, stores, and that would be totally good for the front end. But the question was regarding the how to call that entity like in a generic way in a source code.
That's an important distinction, but I still like Laura's idea for location because I do think the word point can mean many different things. So on the code side, we can go with pickup location.
Okay, looks like we're good here.
Yeah. Also, so the next point that I will try to share my screen. So, do you see a browser?
No,
No.
Just
Okay.
not yet.
not yet.
And now?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So we have did some analysis about. We just checked websites which are using in-store pickup functionality. This is different websites in different businesses, and there is around 14 different websites, and we just searching to collect which attributes are in use for this pickup locations on the front end. And we found that the most used information is, of course, name and address of sources. Also, there is such attributes as open hours and contact info. It's the most used attributes. And we figure out that all attributes in the top four are used except the open hours, which are currently not available in the source entity. So are we going to do something with the open hours, or we going to keep these attributes in the MVP?
Sorry, just to clarify on that. So you said the other ones are already in the source, but I think in many cases the merchants might not want to show on the front end the same name that they have for the source now, because they might call their source something that is meaningful to them internally, like Northwest Store or something, but they would want to show a different name on the front end. So are you proposing here that they would have to use the same name as the source name?
Actually, this is the next point that we would like to also discuss about multi-languaging, because one of the points that customer can have a different name for the source as for the source, and on the front end there should be different name, but also the names of the store can be different in languages. So probably as such area as Ukraine, where we have Ukrainian and Russian languages. Also there is such area as Canada, where they have English and French. And so one store can support two languages, and we also need to show some general information about pickup points also in these languages. I think the question is how to be going to manage this from the merchant point of view, because for now we have source inventory, but there is no any locale, any possibility to manage it per website, and to set different values for different stores.
Right, we don't have any association now between the websites and the sources, or I mean the store views and the sources. The way that it first comes to mind is that we could have the ability for them to put in a name, or even address, whichever fields that we need to localize. for all currently enabled store views.
So I think, what your vision about this? Is it going to be in the same edit form as for source inventory, or it's going to be an extra new edit form, you know, probably with new grid and.
No, it would be in the same place. So we should have all the source attributes on the single page that we have now. We're just going to be adding to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I will just
Sorry, Igor, maybe we just go back and let's see if we can decide on the elements first, and then we can cover the localization question.
yeah. So, mhm.
I think name is important, but we need to have the ability to show a different name than what they call it internally. The second one, the address we do already capture. Is there a reason that we would need to put a different address because we have that as an attribute already?
No,
Yes,
I
but
believe this address is good.
Okay, so the address is fine. Open hours and contact information, I assume, are both sort of free text fields because there's a variety of ways people might want to enter that information.
There is also could be possibility that open hours. So the source, if in particular it's like a store, it would have open hours for clients, for customers, and the hours of like maintenance and hours of like when when supplies come to the store. So there could be different open hours for the store for the source.
Yeah, but in this one, I don't know that I want to overcomplicate it. We could create an entire scheduling section of this. I mean, we could make this as fancy as possible. But I think we really just need to capture. They can enter it as text what the open hours are. So if they want to put, every day it's open from 9 to 5, they can put that. If they want to list weekdays and then they want to list weekends separately, they can type in whatever they want.
yeah,
Okay.
also probably that contact info for source and for pickup location that can be different contact persons.
Yes. The way that we use the contact information now is typically going to be the person that is the manager of the location.
Okay.
So the way I envision it, and we'll have to check with Eugene on the UX side of this, is that we would have probably at the bottom of the page, first we have to have the choice of whether this location, this source, is eligible for pickup. Then we need to have these public-facing fields: name, address, open hours, content info. And then we probably should, after that, discuss type. I know, Igor, we had some prior discussions around whether we need a type in here.
Mm-hmm. We'll come to this question regarding the type a little bit further because guys also have a question regarding that. So probably, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but there was one thing I wanted to bring up. Under store information for the general Magento store, under configuration information, there is a store hours of operation. So we need to make sure that whatever we add to the source for store's hours of operation doesn't conflict with that, or they know it's not conflicted.
Well, we're actually introducing a new concept, which makes that a bit difficult because the store hours we have now.
Right. I just wanted
they were written for a world where the website was sort of like a single site. It had a location. The merchant can decide if they want to put that on the front end. So, I mean, there's a CMS page I think it's a widget that they can put the store hours in.
Yeah, I
So,
just wanted to make sure for any code or database or anything of that nature that it doesn't conflict with that info, whatever we create. Just wanted to bring it up.
got it. Yeah, that's a good point. But I think it makes sense to keep this separate.
Guys, regarding the operational hours, I'm just because let me find an interface. So I'm dropping the link to the chat. Because currently, on a source level, we don't have the attribute responsible for operational hours. So the question is actually whether we would like to introduce this attribute for in-store pickup sources only, or for all sources, or it's okay not to introduce it at all. Because currently we see that many store pickup implementation for in different services use this parameter which provide the idea for customers when they could come and grab that product. But currently we don't store that functionality at all on the source level. So we can introduce it as an extension attribute which would be accessible on all the sources, or we can introduce it as an attribute which would be available just for in-store pickup sources.
Again, that's probably something to review with UX. My preference would be that the first choice they make is whether it's a pickup location. If that's enabled, then these additional fields appear and are enabled. Because they don't have any need to enter this type of information for places that customers will never go to. The other way to do it is just have them as non-required fields if it's not enabled for pickup, but I think that's more confusing because we do need them to be required for locations that are eligible for pickup.
Okay. Do we see a necessity to introduce other attributes like that? So currently, what we were talking with guys a little bit earlier today and yesterday, that whether we have kind of attribute set for entities, for sources which would be eligible for the in-store pickup, or we'll just reuse the limited number of existing attributes which are already allocated in sources.
My preference would be that we make a limited number. So not that we create an attribute system just for this. I think that goes beyond what we need to accomplish here. We need to have a separate discussion around type. But given that they will already have two free fields, pretty much, open hours and contact information, if there's some additional information that they wanted to have, they could retranslate where it says open hours on the front end to something differently and have other content in that field, or even more than one piece of content in that field. And it would display properly on the front end without them having to make any changes to the interface.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like we're good here.
So I think the next point is thus we're going to have for now we have source inventory. Also we currently talking about pickup location. So thus we're going to have some another kind of this source inventory. Probably it can be like drop shipper. So introduce like yeah.
And if we are talking about different type of inventory like dropshipper, do we see a necessity to introduce dropshipper specific attributes for this kind of entity?
The way we had discussed it before is the type field would be used exclusively really for custom source selection algorithms. So if you wanted to have logic that said, I want to fulfill this internally, but if it's not possible internally, then I want to go look at my dropshippers I have loaded in the system. You could write an algorithm to do that.
Yeah, that's true. But
what is it?
this is probably part of functionality. So, but so dropshipper, yep, definitely we can the differentiation of dropshipper we can reuse for the source selection algorithm and like prioritize or deprioritize the way how these sources would be chosen by the source selection algorithm. But here is another like interesting question: whether to combine this logic to one attribute or to have two different attributes like dropshipper and like a separate attribute and another dedicated attribute for in-store pickup. Because whether it's even possible to have a dropshipper which would be used for the in-store pickup.
I don't see a real business case for it, but certainly there's nothing that would prevent them from doing that. If you have a type equals dropshipper and you also have an independent choice of whether it's eligible for pickup, you can enable that. They would have to complete the other pieces of the other information fields.
Okay, so on the UI level, you see this as two different attributes, like dropshipper and in-store pickup eligible. Yep.
Yes, and it's not whether it's a dropshipper or not, it's a source type. And the merchant needs the ability to define the list of types.
Because I think those adding slashes, those are
Okay. If so, can you describe what this type is gonna be?
Like they could use anything that they want. It could be store, distribution center, locker, dropshipper, etc. Whatever they want to call it, they can define types and then assign them to sources.
But you don't include the in-store pickup eligibility into the type of source.
No.
Okay, got it. So looks like the resolution here that we would have a type, but the type of the source type is not really related to the in-store pickup track, because for in-store pickup track we would have the independent attribute, and that independent attribute will represent whether the source is eligible for in-store pickup.
And if you want, we can remove that story from this track because you're correct, it's completely independent. And the main reason that we introduced the type is to enable extensibility of the source selection algorithm. So it's not something we need for in-store pickup. We could write it up as a story and take it out of this part of the project.
Yeah, sounds reasonable, so that we can move it to independent story, which wouldn't be really related to the in-store pickup track.
Right.
Yeah.
that same one.
I think it's the last point in my list. It's about shopping cart. So on the shopping cart, as we already discussed on the previous MSI demo, there is a section about estimation, shipping cost, and tax. So the question is, in store pickup shipping method, how it should or would like to
and then I don't have the merchant
use this step.
I don't think that you will have merge permissions. So they will need to merge, but you will.
I'm sorry, I'm already just thinking ahead to the next thing, which is whether there's any ability to have an additional charge for store pickup. Not that I've ever seen a merchant charge for store pickup, but in the shipping estimation now, I believe, I don't have it up on my screen, but they only enter their postcode, and that is used to do the shipping estimation. In most cases, in-store pickup is at no charge to the customer. It's free, so if we want to keep that, so we're not adding any ability to have a charge for in-store pickup, then we could modify that front-end presentation to say, or I'm just trying to think whether we actually have to modify it at all. because what that's allowing them to do is get an estimate if they ship the order. If they don't ship the order, they do in-store pickup. The estimate doesn't really make sense because it's not going to charge them anything. Did you have any proposals for how to modify the estimate section?
We can just hide it.
Yes, we can just hide it, or
Well,
we.
The estimate appears before they get to the place that they are selecting their method of delivery. Because when you're viewing the cart, it will be by the order summary sidebar. So I'm just saying it's on the screen before they indicate whether they want to pick up or have delivered.
Wouldn't it make sense? The times I've seen it is you would have the in-store pickup option along, like on the same screen as the shipping, so they choose one or the other.
I'm trying to remember, Igor, do you know if we have a setting? I think that this estimator is an optional to display in the first place.
I'm not really sure whether it's possible to not to place it at all. Zhenya, maybe you're better aware about that because you was part of the team who implemented the order functionality.
I'm pretty sure that it's not configurable. I think it's always there, and even more, all of the choices you input on that estimator, they are also transferred to checkout. So this is something we have to be aware of, like if we are hiding it or changing its behavior, that checkout might be affected as well.
Yeah.
So, as from my point of view, there are possible, I don't know, 3 options. First, as a store pickup method is not shown on this step, but it can be bad for the customer experience. Second option that customer can select shipping method as in store pickup, and after he will go to the checkout, as we will have 2 buttons in the shipping step, that's pick up in store and delivery method. So it's the only thing that it will be required for him is just to select store, as he already selected in store pickup in the shopping cart. And the third option is to show shipping method in store pickup and also show drop down with stores where he can select the store for estimation.
Right. I just think the last one I would probably not want to do that because I don't want to add too much complexity to this part, which is really just it's a widget right now. So looking at your first 2 options, I don't have it up. I should probably pull it up on my screen. They have right now the ability to enter a postcode, and I can't remember what the button says there at that point, but they can get an estimate. Probably says estimate shipping and tax, something along those lines. So yeah, we could either have some type of option like pick up in store as a checkbox. If they check back, then it grays out the place where they would enter the postcode. So then when they do an estimate, it's going to come up with 0. Or we could enable even just a message to appear underneath the postcode entry if in-store pickup is enabled for any sources on the current website's stock. It could say something like, there's no charge for in-store pickup. I think from those 2 options, we definitely need to get an opinion from Eugene. because it's going to also impact the next screen. Right now, you're saying if I make an estimate, it carries over to what I've. Well, it could carry over. For example, if I have the option to select in-store pickup on that estimator, then I do, and then I can click proceed to checkout. I might expect that on that page, normally I have an option between what's the shipping address or in-store pickup. It would be pre-selected to in-store pickup because that's what I had done on the estimator.
Yeah, this sounds.
This is pretty much like it works now, but without store pickup.
Because right now, I don't think anything transfers over from that. Meaning,
It
estimators is
should
independent.
transfer. It should transfer. We had a feature which I think was called something like persistence or whatever, but at some point it worked for sure. If it doesn't, then it's a bug. But
What was
yeah,
it persisting? Just the postcode? Because I think that's
it
all they're
was
entering.
persisting everything in the estimator. You actually can also select the shipping method, and in some cases also a city and a country, so it's not limited to postcode.
Okay.
Yeah, so that we can preserve that behavior, just to introduce the in-store pickup to the possible list of the delivery method, and also we have to rename the shipping options into the delivery method on the front end, and thus the choosing the in-store pickup will lead to the next page, to the checkout with a pre-selected switch on a in-store pickup delivery method.
Yeah, so in the current design Eugene had, I think we have it as tabs, so the in-store tab is selected. Of course, at that point, if they change their mind, they can click on the other tab, but in-store pickup is selected by default.
Okay.
I've just checked the estimator of persistence as we talked, and indeed it still works. So I've just input on my sample store the state, country, and zip codes, and it's successfully transferred to checkout.
Can you just share your screen so it would be more visible for other guys on call?
Just a second. I have some sample store here. Let's start over. Yeah, this is the estimator in question. So I select access, zip code. So here we have shipping options. Currently it's only flat rate on this store. And it should also calculate taxes. It's not included in my installation, but it can be. And when we go to checkout, what happens here is that I already have the zip code, the state, the country, and I think you can also configure the city, because we have some admin configuration regarding this, and I don't remember exactly which. And it also have like backwards effect, because I've just changed the zip code on the checkout, came back to the cart, and now zip code from checkout has transferred here. So this has pretty big integration with checkout.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the best way to modify that then, because right now we don't have in-store pickup as technically it's not a shipping method. I'm not sure whether we need to make it as a shipping method. If we did, it could appear on that screen as an option. You check the radio button for in-store pickup and it would be free, if we make it as a shipping method, it would also give the merchant the ability to charge for in-store pickup if they wanted to. I don't see why they would, but they would have the option. We could have that as a shipping method setting.
Why can't we just do it the same way as it's planned to do on checkout? I mean, on the estimation screen, you can also like have a selection shipping or pickup, which would then hide shipping rates or hide pickup locations from the estimator.
We can. I am struggling a bit to understand the best design, the best way to do that interaction, so I would want to review it with Eugene.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So what they would be able to do, if we can just talk about the outcomes, is they can either do the estimator as it is now. If they do that, those items that they entered, the fields they entered, are persisted to the next page when they proceed to checkout. If in the estimator they select in-store pickup, then they will, on the next page, have the in-store pickup tab pre-selected for them. Now, the exact means of how we're asking them, is it a radio button? Does the question come ahead of where they enter the postcode or after? Those types of things. I would like to get Eugene's opinion, but I think that pretty much covers what it would be able to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so regarding resolution of this question, we will clarify that with you again. But our current idea that we will introduce the corresponding radio button, and based on that button, so we will differentiate the shipping out of the in-store pickup, and if the in-store pickup radio button would be clicked, we will go on the next page with the pre-selection of the in-store pickup, which guys, do you have other questions to discuss?
Just rewind about localization. Just skipped it and about localization of name and probably address naming and for the pickup location on the store views. So
Because we have no association now between sources and website stores or store views, but the translation is done for store views, then it would have to be some type of grid that allows you to input these things by store view. So in your example in Quebec and Canada, if I have an English and a French, I would see the two store views, Quebec EN, Quebec FR, and then I would have the ability to enter a name, open hours, and contact info for each of those.
Mm-hmm.
And again, whether it's required fields or not. This is tricky because it probably should not be required fields because there's many store views and only certain combinations would apply to certain sources. What I mean by that is if I have a source in the United States, I don't want to enter information for the Quebec store view for that source. I only need to enter that if I don't ship from the US to Canada. If I have multiple sources in Canada that I use to fulfill orders placed on the Quebec website, then I want to enter correct localization for each of those sources. But because we don't know in advance which sources are assigned to which store views, because they're not assigned, we cannot make the field required. Then on the front end, when we display the store information, it will just display for the current store view. And if nothing has been entered there, it does not display anything in that section.
I'm thinking that as we already discussed, so probably we need to enter some other name for the pickup location that is for source inventory. So probably we can have a separated field for this, and this field probably can be changed per store view. So I'm just thinking how it will look from the
So
administration.
you mean instead of a grid, we have a scope selector at the top?
Yeah, we have a scope selector, but only that fields which are related to the pickup location will be present on the store level.
Or they may all be present, but the only ones that will be editable are ones that apply to store view. So if we have a scope selector at the top and I pick, Quebec French for my store view, then I will see I only have the ability to edit the name, store hours, and contact info, and then save that. It's very similar to how we do other things in the admin, so that's good. We can check this with the UX team as well. I'm sure Eugene has an opinion on how we can remain consistent with other settings.
But currently, from my perspective, I would really tend to consider this feature as nice to have, because it introduced a lot of challenges from the technical perspective. Because currently in the whole Magenta, we have one kind of scope, and this is scope of the website, store, and the store view. From the MSI standpoint, from the new inventory standpoint, we have own kind of scoping, and that scope is actually the stock plays role of the scope. And now we have kind of intersection or overlapping or multiplication of these scopes, because we have the Magenta scope and the MSI scopes. Before that, we have the one-to-one matching of this scope, because we had the sales channel like Magenta website, which is assigned like 1 to 1 to MSI scope. But now we have additional context in the scope of the store view for particular attribute. So it's really blowing my mind how we can implement that under the hood.
Yeah, it's a good point. I want to think about this in terms of whether we're trying to cover something that's too far of an edge case. In most scenarios, it would be acceptable just to have it in. You only have the ability to input one set of information. Let me give an example. Like if you're in Europe and you have store locations, say in France and Spain and Germany, I think it's reasonable for the customers to expect that if they want to pick up something, in most cases it will be near their home. So if they want to pick up something in Germany, they're going to see the store names, store information in German, because it was only entered one way. It was entered in German. Same with the French ones and the Spanish ones. In the use case of Quebec that we had before, where they may have a legal requirement to show things in 2 languages, there's nothing that prevents them from just entering twice as much information in the field. So they could, in the store hours field, they could list the hours in English, and then they could list the hours in French underneath in the same field, and it would display on the front end. So that would be a workaround that would prevent them from having to do any localization. And that's an unusual case, but it is one. The only case maybe this doesn't cover is, and I've seen this case before, which is something happens a lot. I go on a business trip, or I travel somewhere else, and I needed to buy something, but I didn't pack my stuff in time, so I'm like behind. So I need to order something and pick it up a place I'm going to go that I don't live. When I do that, it may be that that store information is only presented in the local language. But that seems to me like quite an edge case. Mm-hmm. In other words, if I'm going to Barcelona and there's a Magenta store that offered in-store pickup, I might have to see the store name and hours in Spanish when I select it at checkout. But that doesn't seem unreasonable to me, given that I'm shopping on their store from another country. And the third workaround for that is Google Translate. The browser will translate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's stay with one attribute at least for now, and we can't, because this is not really typical case for us. So this is not kind of PO or P0 case. So priority one or priority zero. So, and the cost for implementation of this support would be probably much higher than the benefit would be given to us after the implementation of this particular feature. So let's postpone this feature and the possible discussion regarding the design of how this support can be implemented to further releases of in-store pickup, if there would be any. But we'll just put it out of the MVP implementation of pickup.
I think it's great. It just makes me think of one other feature, or maybe a question, related question, which is what types of input do we allow in those fields? Like, do we allow HTML tags, or what can be in that in those fields? I could see a scenario where you want to have like your store hours in a table, or one section and then some sort of spacer block and then another set of store hours, which could be easily accomplished with HTML. But do we allow that, or we only allow text input?
As XML, currently all our entities, they supposed to be represented as data transfer objects, and the HTML is more related to the representation of the data. So we can just store the data in some format which represents the way how it should be displayed on website or somewhere, because potentially it could be the same data could be reused in different systems, and maybe they would be just transferred to another system. So they would be represented not in a browser, but in, I don't know, in maybe web in an iPhone application, so that the HTML wouldn't be rendered properly.
Okay, it does simplify it for us as well then.
Are there any other open questions regarding the issues you faced with during this week, guys?
I think our list are empty, so we can proceed with the feature requests.
Yeah. So Igor, we did have one that we talked about the regional settings for calculating distance. So on the front end, whether we make a real-time call to sort the locations by distance from the customer's address. And if we do, we want to show how far away they are. And if we want to show how far away they are, which unit of measure do we display?
Yep. So, So yeah. So the question, we have first of all we have a question whether we should provide this kind of configuration on the admin panel, whether we use metric system or imperial system, and so whether it should be configurable via the admin panel. And another one, also whether it should be somehow related to the store view function, for example. Because if so, that's also introduced kind of problems for us, or we can just make this configuration on the level of website, let's say, so that it would be available per stock, but not per store view. And yeah, probably this is pretty much all, because front-end representation would be it's pretty much clear, so that we'll just show in distance in whether miles and feet or in kilometers and meters. So the question regarding the admin configuration and to what, whether it's okay to just make that coupling to website.
Where does that information come from now? Is that part of the locale data? Because I don't see. I'm looking in the admin for where to set it, but I don't see it.
We don't have that information in admin panel right now at all. So what we use for the distance-based algorithm, currently we use the metric system.
No, what I mean is, independent of MSI, do we have anywhere in the admin panel that we define those types of
No.
regional settings? Okay. So are you proposing that we have to have a new inventory setting, which can be adjusted by website?
So the
like a global configuration?
Mm-hmm. So the easiest way how we can do it, so we can still proceed with doing all the calculation in one system, let's say the metric system, but just configure somewhere in a configuration what the way of the representation is gonna be per the website level, so that we can convert all that level, for example, to miles and feet. And just for example, on the in-store pickup page where we will be showing the list of all nearby sources, we will be just show the distance in miles and feet. That's also we'll make that conversion. But all the calculation actually happens in one metric system. So for example, all the requests to the Google will be in metric system.
And the response as well, or we will have Google do the conversion in the response?
And the responses. So yeah, ideally is to have Google to make Google respond in a correct metric system, so that we no need to convert it manually.
Yeah, I don't want to do manual conversions, especially given that Google already has that capability. So my question is, do you envision another setting on this page that is based on this scope? So in other words, for a particular store view, I can set the distance metrics, whether I want metric system or imperial.
So the thing I really wanted to avoid is a configuration on the store view level here, because we'll have pretty much the same problem with as with localization of name, which we discussed a little bit earlier.
Is it the same problem or slightly different? Because in this case, we're not having to do anything with sources. At the time of checkout, we have awareness of which website is being used, and we're just associating the metrics used in the calculation to the website. If you have another idea, I just want to see where they're going to set this setting and how it will work. The merchant needs some way to decide for each store view which metric should be used. So I think if we just have one, it's really not workable. Mm-hmm. We can't just say it's in meters and kilometers, and every country has to use that. That wouldn't work.
Okay. Maybe. Yeah. So probably you're right that this is another issue, and we can have this configuration on the level of store view. But for example, like what we wanted to introduce a configuration parameter of radius, and get all the sources which are within this radius, like nearby mm-hmm. Sources available for the in-store pickup. So how we will specify this radius? In which
is this a merchant option, or is something you want the customer to be able to decide?
We thought that it's going to be merchant option because, for example, this is not configurable, for example, on Walmart in-store pickup configuration, or like Apple, or they will just provide the zip code and the bunch of nearby zip codes and the sources.
They will return some, and I mean, mm-hmm. I've seen it both ways. I've seen some sites that you can pick the distance. Other ones, they just cut it off somewhere like 50 miles, and they show you whichever ones are closer. They say, sorry, there are no stores within radius of your location. I think it makes sense. It makes sense to be here because I don't know where else we would put it. Like I said, it doesn't relate to the sources. It relates to really the regional type settings of the store views.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes correctly in the inventory section. That they have an ability here where they're setting these other items for a distance provider, for example, that they can set which metric they want to use, or which unit of measure, and the radius. And those can be adjusted if I, on this one, only have one store view, but if I had multiple ones, I can just click through and change them. And it's okay if this takes a little while, like if I have 20 store views, because it's not something you're going to change for, you're going to set it once and it's done.
Okay. So, so here
now we could get around this by just saying it's a nice to have. We don't show distance. We just calculate the distance. That's it. I mean, on the front end, so the customer would see a list of stores. It would just not show them how far away the stores are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was one of the options. Like I wanted to say that the simplest one would be just hide all the possible information on the front end at all, and just avoid this issue as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. I don't see any reason why we couldn't start with that, because it's much faster for us to do.
Yeah, that's true, but like at least from the API standpoint, we should realize whether we need to introduce kind of abstraction layer where we can keep all this measurement data and where we can switch, at least preserve possibility of switching to calculation from metric to imperial system and vice versa, or we will be working with kind of straight measurement numbers, and we will add some kind of hard coding on the representation part later. So that, like, I just really want to avoid the possible issue which we currently have with the price, because the price is really hard to customize for particular markets. For example, like we have another community project for localization for Japan, and the other Asian markets, and the complexity with that is that on that market they don't have a fractional part for price. So because currently in Magento we have a floating number, and we always consider that price will consist from both integer part and, let's say, floating part, like which represents cents. But in Japan there is no such meaning like cents. So that representation of the floating part of the price is not really correct, and we don't have like a one place where we can fix that. So we have to fix all the places where the price is output on the front end. So this introduce some complexity with the customization for such markets. So that if it's gonna be just one particular usage, we can not introduce too much complexity. But if it's potentially that would be that the system will evolve, we probably need to preserve this ability at least for future.
I think it's that. I mean, whether we do it now or not, it's something I could see that we're going to have to add. So we should think about what structure will enable that. But we don't need to do it in this, what we call the V1 or MVP of the in-store pickup.
Okay, great. So like resolution here that we are not showing on front end any information regarding the mileage, so any distance. But on a code side, we will think how to figure out whether like try to introduce like abstraction layer and try to play around with that to make it more customizable and extendable.
Mm-hmm.
So looks like we have negotiation here. So we probably can proceed with the idea which Bettina and Pablo drop us in the MSI Slack channel. Bettina, are you still here?
Hi, I am.
Great. So can you please describe the idea so that we can discuss it, because guys from the ISM company also can just grab it as a part of the in-store pickup track, so we can discuss it here either.
Okay, so our idea was that we would need some notion of how to transfer stock from one source to another. And the point is, it's mostly for in-store pickup. We've seen some more complex use cases where a physical store is actually divided up into several sources. So say, the floor is a source, and then they consider, the back warehouse a different source. So when you bring an item from the back to the floor, then you would have to do some version of a stock transfer. The most common case is in-store pickup, right? So when you say, you're due fulfillment from a different store, and it happens to us also that people shop at one physical store, but then they don't have that item, or they need to change it or something, so they go pick it up at a different physical store. And that would also be another source. So what we want to do is have some sort of, at least at first, simple notion of a stock transfer, where you say, I want to take a given number of items for SKU X and send them from source A to source B. Now we brought this up, and Igor mentioned a number of really good comments on how complex this can get. So the idea was to discuss with everyone what the best implementation would be here, so it doesn't get too complex. Because as you mentioned, this isn't going to be a full procurement solution, but so we can consider those cases and not have to transfer all stock from one source to another. I don't know if that makes sense to everyone.
Yeah, definitely make. So, Mark,
Yeah.
what do you think? Like, how we can...
Are you envisioning an API solution for this, or something that the merchant can do in the admin? I mean, right now in the admin, the workaround or the way that they do this is they just look at a product and they see all the sources, and they can say, I want to reduce source A by 6 units and increase source B by 6 units. They just type it in and save it. It's not as elegant as what you described. Are you envisioning more an API to make this transfer that you can call from a third-party system?
Yeah, that was mostly our thought. Basically, I mean, mostly because we have a point of sale, so that would be one of the functionalities that we offer, but also because it would be simpler to move, say, 2 or 3 items or however many you have in an order or a bunch of orders at once, instead of having to go to the admin and do it there for each one. Also, sometimes the sales reps don't have access to the admin, so they would have to get another person to come in and do it for them, and it gets a little, just, more complicated.
In fact, we already have this API. We use this API for the source-to-source transfer, but in that case, we apply the transfer for all products allocated on particular source. But in this case, we will just change the scope, and we will be making the transfer for the products in the scope of the order. So actually, from the API standpoint, I believe we are good, because we already have this bulk API transfer, which we can reuse here. So this is probably the question regarding the UI for this transfer in this particular case.
Well, it sounds like a UI transfer is not required.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't required for us. It was just something that, you might want to discuss. I don't know, useful for other people. I don't have a use case in mind for that. When you, Igor, do you have a reference to the API you mentioned?
Yeah, give me a second, I'll find it.
Thank you. Because that would solve a lot of problems for us. What we wanted to avoid was having to do individual updates to the stock via the API, because then we would get in trouble if we were to, if one of those updates failed, then we would have inconsistent data.
So while you're looking for that, Igor, I think if the current API supports this, great. If it doesn't, and even if we needed to introduce another API, we should consider that as a separate story outside of scope of the in-store pickup track.
Correct. So I just found that API. So probably let me share the screen. So probably we can say that we are supporting that. So what I meant that API which are part of the inventory catalog API, and here we have kind of bulk API and transfer here, but this API currently works on the we are not allowed to specify quantity here. So we specify the origin source, destination source, and the SKUs, and the API imply that the whole number of stock would be moved from one source to another. So it's not possible to specify kind of limitation in quantity on a SKU basis.
Right.
So yeah, so probably that's a point to introduce another API where transfer on the level of the source and SKU would be added. Source, SKU, and quantity.
So probably it can be transferring from one source to another source and the quantity. Also, it can be transferring to the source from the list of sources and the quantity to make this like in one transaction.
Yeah, so actually, literally, when we were like discussing this story, so actually this API, I don't have. So these APIs are used for like source-to-source migration, which is in particularly helpful for merchants who are just making migration from the single source to multi-sources, and they're migrating all the data from the default source to some custom sources. So that we considered that maybe it makes sense to introduce a possibility to specify quantity to be migrated, but we did not find, at that time when we were discussing this possibility with Mark, we did not find a solution how this could be useful for a big number of products, because probably like merchants have to specify that quantity per each product, so it would be really annoying, and and this is not really achievable via Magenta Admin UI. So that we considered the idea like specifying some kind of percentage of the stock which should be moved, but taking into account that some of the products will have the decimal quantity and other will have the integer quantity, so it would not be like specification of the percent would not really work for that. So that's why we decided not to proceed with this kind of migration where merchant can specify the quantity. But looks like during when we started to implement in-store pickup, we got several requests where people would like to use the source-to-source transfer in particular to fulfill the in-store pickup order. Because currently, how we're going to implement the in-store pickup, we're going to accept orders on a particular source which is eligible for in-store pickup, even so we don't have enough product to fulfill that order on that particular location. So that merchant to fulfill that order supposed to make an internal transfer from other sources to this particular source, and then click the notify about the that order is ready for customer. So that this is just one business case which appear, and this business case could be common for in-store pickup track. This is actually also this is correct that we can postpone this API implementation and put it into another story, but currently it's just we got several this requests, and actually Pablo, who approached me a week ago regarding this particular scenario. So they also wanted to introduce this kind of migration in the scope of the in-store pickup. That's why, like, I brought this topic for consideration for in-store pickup grooming, because usually people face with this issue for in-store pickup order fulfillment.
Right, but I think given that we have no plan to introduce some sort of automatic type transfer based on in-store pickup orders that would call this API, I think we can, move the API outside the scope of in-store pickup. And we could do it either, you're correct what you said everything before about how it wasn't possible for us to do this because we didn't know a way to do it in the admin UI where I have multiple products and I want to set the quantity for each and then decide which sources they're going to. It becomes too difficult to enter. For the API though, we can just, we can do an array of products, an array of quantities, and you can enter one if you like, or you can enter, a matched array of products and quantities, either way.
So do you propose to introduce just a set of APIs which would not be really used nowhere in Magento, and just propose third-party developers and extension developers to utilize them if they want?
It's more for integration purposes. So right now they could already achieve this use case by just overriding the inventory for each of these products. So if I want to move from one to another, I just set a new inventory for that product and the two sources. That can already be done by API. This is just making it an easier way to do that. So I don't have to actually write it in two places. I like decrement the old and increment the new one. I can just do it in one call. So it's for ease of integration, but no, we are not using it directly in Magento core.
Should we treat this set of API, or probably the one service, as a part of the in-store pickup track, or as a separate one?
Separate.
Okay. So it looks like we have a resolution here as well. So we are not changing our UI, but along with that, in the scope of the separate task, we will introduce a dedicated service which will provide the possibility to make a source-to-source migration per SKU, specifying the quantity which should be deducted from one source and incremented into destination source. So looks like, yeah, and the last one question from the chat, I'm not sure whether, so Tadeo already left the meeting, but in the chat he was asking whether we want to support or preserve supporting possibility to support possibility of lockers for the in-store pickup location, like Amazon lockers, I believe.
Yeah, so for this one, I really don't see it as something that we would support out of the box, because for a locker, you could make every locker as its own source. You'd have to be managing a lot of transfers between them, or a more robust functionality here would have a way to define lockers, and then they have numbers or IDs or something. The lockers are assigned to a particular location, and you can put inventory in each of them. It's a far more complex solution than I think we want to take on here. Also because for lockers, you also have a hardware integration. There's multiple brands of lockers, multiple APIs that they have. So we wouldn't be able to ship out of the box a standardized locker implementation anyways. We would just be shipping some sort of framework that would then have to be integrated to a third-party locker hardware.
Just potentially. So I'm fully agree with you in what you are saying, but just potentially, if we wanted to accommodate that case with the type of the source, so that we could have a type like the locker type on the source level, and we could have a bunch of additional entities kind of cell or whatever in the scope of that particular locker. So it would be kind of relationship one to many, and we would have just a bunch of particular cells, each one having own code or secret key, so that we could proceed with that. But this is definitely out of scope of what we're going to implement in the MVP part. But potentially, even now, it's possible with the concept of source and type.
Yeah, so there's nothing that prevents a merchant from creating a locker as a type and having those entered in the system, because we allow for flexibility in the types that they create. But beyond that, it just gets too complex too quickly, because you could say, well, what products do I need to put in which lockers, and what's the quantity of them, and okay, the lockers need to have a passcode, and it gets pretty complex.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, so we are saying that we are preserving that possibility, but we are not going to implement it out of the box, so that it's just that extension developers are in charge for that functionality if they wish to implement it.
Right, and it actually made me think of one thing. I know we're pretty well over time for this, so we might have to come back to it, but we didn't discuss much the shipping side of in-store pickup. So when I'm in the admin panel, what that looks like from the mock-ups that we had of I need to click a button to indicate to the customer that it's ready for pickup. That needs to use a templated email in a similar format to other Magento templated emails, goes to the customer telling them that their order is ready for pickup.
Mm-hmm. So once again, are we going to reuse the existing template, or we should introduce the new one?
We should have a new template for it, because it would need to have different wording and different information than the other emails, like distinct from order confirmation. So it would say something like, hello name, your order for these items, and it would show the items, because you could do a partial shipment to a pickup. Again, we're not allowing the customer to do a split shipment on the front end, but if the merchant wanted to say some were available for pickup and send the others out, I mean, they could do that. It would say, so these items are available for pickup, and it would say at this location, and then it's going to need to display the source attributes in the email as well.
And the opening and the operational time we probably also should include.
Right.
Lori, can you please help us to compose this pattern for in-store pickup?
For sure. Also, I didn't know if we want to include any possibility of back order and in-store pickup. Is in-store pickup going to strictly show stores that have inventory currently, and if it's got back orders enabled for infinite or 100, will those also show up? Is that some complexity we're going to have to consider?
Actually, so in this case, yeah. So basically, the answer on your question, let me rephrase your question. Whether we can sell more items which currently are located on particular source at the time when the order placement, so yes. And to fulfill that order, before fulfilling the order and before notifying the customer, we have to make kind of procurement and make the internal transition from goods from other sources to the one from where the customer is supposed to grab the whole order. And as soon as that internal transfer would be done, merchant will click the notify customer about that order is ready for the in-store pickup, so that he would be notified with this mail, and he can come and get it. So this is kind of back order, because at the time when the customer places an order, we don't have enough products to fulfill this order on that source. So this is probably pretty much all for today's meeting. Also, we're already 20 minutes out of time, but it was a good discussion. It was pretty fruitful, and I'm really glad that we unblocked guys for the ISM agency, so they can continue working right now, right after this meeting, even so that it's already night in Ukraine.
We should have another meeting at some point where we can circle with Eugene first to get updated mock-ups.
Yep. So
and
probably
just go through those with the group.
And in any case, I believe maybe guys will face another issue, so that we can create that meeting on demand, and as soon as we'll get some updates from you again. But for now, guys, thank you very much for your time, for your ideas. So that was really helpful. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
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 Bye.